In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace your front brake caliper on this Hyundai Sonata. Let's get started. With a 21mm socket, remove all 5 of your lug nuts and then remove the wheel. The first thing I want to do is break free the banjo bolt, which is a 12mm, and the reason I want to do it now is because once this is loose and off of the knuckle, it's going to be a lot more difficult to get the leverage to actually break it free. So snug it right back up. You don't want any fluid dripping out here while we replace the caliper. At this point, I'm just going to unbolt the caliper right off the knuckle here. I'm not going to bother taking it off of the bracket, so ignore the 2 bolts that hold it onto the bracket. Just go for the 2 17mm bolts that hold the whole assembly onto the knuckle. One at the top. Once it's broken free, leave it in a few threads so that you can break free the lower one with this one supporting the rest of the caliper. Take this one out completely. Watch out so the rotor doesn't fall, and then take the top bolt out all the way. Make sure if that washer falls, you put it back on the bolt. Once you take the caliper off, to get these pads out, all you have to do is just pry them in, and they should pop out easily. There we go. I put the caliper right on top of the knuckle here where it's secure, but it's not putting pressure on the brake hose. Now the new caliper needs to be prepared for installation, and one of the things that we have to do is to add a little bit of grease to these 2 areas here where the anti-rattle clips sit. Don't add too much. I added a little bit too much, so I'm going to actually wipe it off with my gloved finger, because if you put too much on here, as soon as you put the anti-rattle clips down and squish it, it'll come out into the rotor area here, and it's going to get on your rotor, which is not a good thing. Let's do this to both sides. Once that's done, take the new anti-rattle clips, slide them on, make sure they lock in. So press them down all the way, and do this to both sides, of course. At this point, I also want to add some grease to the slider pins, so pull them out of their boot. And as you can see, they have some grease on them, but not enough, or at least not enough to my standards. So add a little bit more on the inside of the boot here. This is going to act as a reserve of grease, and it's also going to get on this lip here. This lip right here is what seals up the slider pin right there, and add a little bit to the slider pin, not too much, otherwise it's just going to get wiped off as you insert it. Press it in all the way. You'll notice that there's some air built up in here. The way to get that out is by squeezing the slider pin and then squeezing the boot. That's going to bring out all the excess air as well as any extra grease that you might have accidentally put in there. At this point, let's do the same to this one over here. Peel the boot back, take this out. You'll notice this one has a little damper in here, rubber damper, so make sure that you do them one at a time. That way this one can go back into the bore that it came out of. You don't want to mix these up because this has a purpose. Add some grease to the slider and slide it back in. Squeeze out any excess air. Wipe this off and then give them both a couple twists to work that grease in there. Make sure that they move in and out nice and smooth and they rotate. And now this is ready for installation. And now that we've prepared our new caliper bracket, slide it over the rotor, start in the 2 mounting bolts, top and bottom, and snug them up. "72 foot-pounds is the torque for both of these bolts. A little tight in here, but definitely doable. That's 1. And 2. Slide in your pads. Make sure that the anti-rattle clips are still sitting exactly how they should be. They haven't popped off or are jamming up the pads. Okay, pads slide around smoothly. That's important. Now take the caliper, slide it over the pads and over the bracket, lined up with the 2 slider pins. Snug these up. If your slider is spinning, just hold it with a wrench. You can use a 17mm wrench. Just keep in mind that a thin wrench is all you're going to be able to fit in there. If you don't have one, you can just use some pliers. The torque for these is 23 foot-pounds. Now comes the messy part, so make sure you have a collection bucket ready to go. We're going to take the banjo bolt off of the old caliper using the 12mm wrench or socket that you used earlier, and then we'll transfer it to the new caliper. There we go, let that drain. From the old hose, obviously make sure you remove the banjo bolt, but also check for any copper washers that are stuck on here. You don't want to double gasket those. Your new caliper should come with 2 new ones as well as a new banjo bolt. So take that new banjo bolt, put a copper washer on it, then put it through the hose, and then put another copper washer on the other side. Basically sandwich the hose in between the 2 washers. At this point, we can slide the hose onto the new caliper and make sure that this hook on the hose fits into the slot of the caliper. Bottom it out, and once you're sure that it's fully seated, let's tighten it. With this bottomed out, I like to go about half a turn, and this basically ensures that I'm crushing these copper washers a little bit and making a good seal. At this point, you want to clean off any potential drippage that was caused from transferring the banjo bolt because you don't want to confuse it for a leak. Once you've done that, let's open up the bleeder screw, take an 11mm socket or wrench and crack this open. We'll let gravity pull fluid through. Now, after you do your gravity bleed, you're going to have to do a full manual brake bleed. To begin your manual brake bleed, make sure that your brake master cylinder is topped off with clean fluid. Then you're going to want to have a second person in the car pumping up the brake pedal as you open and close the bleeder screw. So after a few pumps, have them hold pressure on the brake pedal and open up the bleeder screw. At this point, air and fluid will come out. Once the pedal has reached the floor, close off the bleeder screw and have them pump up the brakes again. After 2 to 3 pumps, have them hold pressure on the brake pedal once again and open up the bleeder screw. Repeat this procedure until no more air comes out of the caliper and you have only clean fluid. Once you get to that point, close off the bleeder screw and top off the master cylinder with clean fluid to make sure it's full. All right, we have a clean, steady trickle of fluid going on here. So I'm going to close this off, make sure it's nice and snug, and then I will perform my manual brake bleed like I mentioned. Assuming the manual brake bleed is done, clean off any residual fluid because you don't want to confuse this for a potential leak. It's very important to know if you have a leak in your braking system. Once this is all cleaned off, cap the bleeder screw off, pump up the brakes, and let's put the wheel on. Let's put the wheel back. Put back all 5 of your lug nuts, snug them up, and torque them to 80 foot-pounds. .80 foot-pounds in a cross pattern. Perfect, take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.